Go ahead.
Okay. And so the other use case is Tor and the Tor Snowflake project. And so what they do is they're able to access websites via data channels. And why that's important is you don't have to download a binary client. So like I don't have to go download Tor. It works already because I have my browser. You can't like turn it off because you all of a sudden you block out all these existing conference calls and all these things that people already need. So that's why it's really important. So I think those are the big. There's a lot of other ones. Like there's people are building conferencing servers and stuff like that. But kind of the ethos of Pion is it's like this low level building block, and it's very unopinionated. Go build your crazy dream and use these fundamental building blocks, and go read WebRTC for the Curious to understand the technology and what you can build. So there's the way long. That's like a 50 floor elevator pitch. That's not, but
Of course,
yeah. But that's why I'm excited about it. I love WebRTC because I feel like it can do so much, and yeah, and it's just I love working with all these interesting people and all the amazing things they're doing.
Yeah, I think the WebRTC space has really exploded in the last 3 or 4 years, and there's a lot going on. So compared to other similar projects, such as, I don't even know if they're similar, like compared to other SFU style projects like Janus, which is actually not just an SFU, like Pion or Jitsi, what will you say the differences are?
I think the big one is if you are using a use case that lines up with what Janus is trying to do, I think it makes sense to use Janus, because like if with Pion, like if you're like, okay, I want to do this thing that Janus does very well, I set a few config options and it works, Janus probably makes more sense. But if you have like a more custom use case and you want to plug things in differently, then probably Pion makes sense. And I also think it's also like what you're comfortable with. Like let's say you have this bit, you have like all your tooling is set up and all your infrastructure works well, and you already have Janus config files and it deploys and you're scaled. Like it probably doesn't make sense for your business to switch to Pion. But like let's say you're a Go shop, you're already using it, it already makes sense, like you like that. That's the thing. I think it's very subjective what software you use. Yeah. I think it's a pretty tough sell. And it's also like convincing your team and stuff like that. Like I don't think there's like pros and cons, and there's also there's pure WebRTC implementations in other languages as well. So we have a Rust implementation that's coming up. We have a Python implementation. We have a TypeScript implementation, and we have a C# one as well. And these are all like pure WebRTC implementation, pure connection API. Like you could switch from Pion to one of those very easily. Like they all use the same API.
Those are not under the Pion umbrella, though, right? They're different projects.
Yeah.
Well, I think this it's very interesting. Yeah, Janus in particular. So I know Janus better than others, so that's when I can speak to it. Janus in particular is very modular, so you can build plugins, provided you know how to program in C++. But then, of course, same thing goes for Pion and Go. So it depends on what your shop is and what your goals are. But yeah, it feels like it's so there's still a lot of ready-made applications. I'm looking at a few links and websites. There's still quite a bit you can do to get started right away. Like the SFU looks like it's Docker ready, is it?
Yes, yeah. So in the SFU, it kind of like it's a little different. So there's a couple SFUs that are written in Pion with Pion. So you have Galen, which is written, and it's a JSON-driven config file. It's like a single binary. So you just SCP this binary to your server. You configure it with some JSON, and you're done. It's like statically linked.
Oh wow!
So so it's really nice, and it scales really well. It's written by a professor who Julius, and his goal was he wanted something that was super easy to deploy, and it's like the UI is built for like one-to-many broadcasting and teaching, and it lets students join and like give feedback. So that's one. And then Ion is different because it's written in a way where instead of like you write plugins, you actually have little Docker containers, and each of those are your plugin. So that you could write a Ion container that does just like, speech to text. And you can keep that proprietary to your company. You don't have to worry about integrating it. You don't have to worry about API changes. And it kind of just sits in its own little area. And then you spin up like a like generic Ion cluster, and it fits into it. So Ion I forget the term they use for it, but I'm not actually the author of Ion. Like there's like, I think like at this point, there's probably like 5 to 10 active contributors, and they totally go exist in their own world. And I don't drive the project. I don't contribute. Like that's another big thing with Pion is if you contribute once, I give out a commit bit, and you only need one approval from another person to merge your code. So like there's a lot of people that are working on it that I'm completely unaware of. Like I try to like keep myself out of like being the blocking factor. So, you know, if I get hit by a bus, it won't be a big deal.
That's fantastic. So I was looking at Ion in particular. It looks like it's got clustering built in. So
Yeah.
could you give me some pointers about scaling? Because many people entering the WebRTC space and developing their own service on top of Janos, Pion, whatever, pretty much end up all hitting the same wall, which is, okay, I was testing with my 5 developers. Everything was working great. Now my client has 400 people connected and my server is melting. Help. What's the, do you think there's a better way to scale using Pion? How do you suggest people approaching that kind of problem?
Yeah, so like with Ion, like the idea is that you could have like one cluster that does your WebRTC ingestion, and then if you're doing like a one-to-many, then you could do, you know, a WebRTC to HLS, and those would be like your HLS serving clusters, and they would like pull from your SFU, and they would watch. Because like if you're like help, I'm melting, like you either want like, it's like the thing I hear, like I want a bunch of little rooms, and so then like Ion works because it spins up a bunch of, you know, it's in cluster mode and it spins up a bunch of containers. Or I want like giant rooms, and then usually with giant rooms, like it doesn't make sense to do WebRTC because it's just like it's more expensive. It's harder to load balance and stuff like that. And so then I say like, hey, why don't you look into WebRTC to HLS, which you can do with the Ion AVP audio visual processing node. So kind of like
particularly interested into the latter. Huge rooms have been, something that people talk about more and more. I was talking to a person here in Italy that was trying to set up a system for remote voting for people who have shares in a company. So it's like 1,000 people. They used to all go to a big auditorium and have the CEO give a speech, blah, blah. Then they will vote on whatever, their shares, etc. But right now they can't do that, and it's come up more and more that you have 1,000 people that are in an audience, and there's like 5 main speakers, but then all of the other 1,000 people need to be able to take the stage if they need to, because you're allowed to ask questions. So I would like to ask about this share and this and that. That's been not a problem, but something we've been considering for a while, but as a company in open source. So how would you suggest handling that using Pion?
Yeah. So what I would think about it there is you have like an SFU, and you can bring on like, you know, if someone raises their hand, you bring them into the WebRTC session, and then we're done, you kick them out, and then you do RTP to HLS with the people that are like broadcasting, and then everyone can watch that. Because the issue is you have the congestion control. So like you can run, like you probably don't want to run a congestion controller for each viewer, because it's usually like sender driven congestion control. So if you have 1,000 viewers and you're running a congestion controller for each viewer, like that's going to add up to a lot of CPU cycles. So the nice thing about HLS is it puts the congestion control on the responsibility of the browser, and the browser will say like, okay, I can do 1080p. Oh crap, I can only do 720p. And so it's nice to push that complexity on the viewer for HLS. Like it takes off a lot of cycles. I think there's a lot of it's one of those things. There's like a lot of nuance and a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
And then it depends on like what you want. Like, do you want that insight? And then like, or maybe like you can just throw those the segments in a CDN, and then it's super cheap to distribute and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of things to consider, and it's like, how much complexity versus how easy to deploy. Like I think there's a lot of things to talk about there. And that's kind of why I pitched WebRTC for the Curious, because I could like talk about this for hours and all the different like edge cases and stuff like that. But then I push people to say, hey, go learn it on your own and like build your system. So that's what I most like when developers come to me in the Pion Slack. That's usually what ends up happening, is I like expound about all the corner cases, and I'm like, you know what, I really don't know. And they usually do a better job than me.
Before we go into some things about WebRTC for the Curious, I'm just interested in your discussion with you had about HLS. I've seen HLS in the past. I've seen HLS have a lot of unpredictable latency with clients. So if you're doing something that's real time, such as having a voting moment, so that at some point a pop-up comes up on your screen and you're supposed to click yes or no on the new purchase from the company that's supposed to purchase another company. You want to vote yes or no. That should happen more or less. We always be on point, but that should happen more or less in sync with the speech. So the CEO is saying, please vote on the people will be minutes behind or ahead using HLS. Is there a way to reduce the kind of latency if you're doing the kind of streaming?
Oh, I don't think the latency for HLS, I think you're talking at most 30 seconds. Yeah.
So as long as it's managed properly by the speaker, we're being informed and trained, that shouldn't be an issue. But instead of just saying vote right now, they can say, in a few seconds, you will see a pop-up screen asking you for a vote. Please go ahead. So generally speaking, you will always be a little bit behind, right?
Yeah. I guess if like it's like another like an interesting Pion user I had was they were doing cattle, and so like so they would over a WebRTC feed they would bring on like a bowl, and then everyone would be bidding on it, and so like the sub-second of WebRTC was super important because people are like actively bidding like by the cent, trying to outbid each other on this cattle. So yeah, like there are cases where like you have to do WebRTC and you have to do many viewers and scale it. But like if you're like, okay, like we're going to do a vote, and you got 3 minutes, HLS might make sense. But yeah, I think you can do both, but it really depends on like what problem are you trying to solve.
We'll catch up eventually, for sure. HLS is a great distribution mechanism, and I think we're not using that enough in the industry for sure. That's actually true. Speaking of the industry, you have this wonderful website/book called WebRTC for the Curious, which we mentioned multiple times. And as I was telling you earlier, I have directed people to it because it's really, really super interesting. So you already told us it came from your necessity of having someone to refer to. What do you think are the hardest parts to learn about WebRTC in general?
The two, I guess, the one that I hear the most is the connectivity part. So people will say like, I don't understand like why did it work in my LAN but not when I put it on the internet? And then people go look up stun, and the description of stun is usually incorrect. It says like get your public IP, but it's not really what's happening. It's it's like doing a NAT mapping and all these things. So that would be the first one I think that people come up against is like connectivity issues, because you need to understand the nuance. You need to understand like what can you promise your users, like if you're running stun, if you're running turn, and what happens there. So that's the first I see people trip over. And then the second I see people trip over is understanding like what happens with real-time communication over the internet. So like explaining like why does congestion happen? How does congestion manifest? Like what, the difference between, jitter, buffer bloat, packet loss, and like how like no two networks act the same. Like you can have a router that has huge buffers, and so you don't lose anything, but it falls behind live. Then you can have another router that like doesn't buffer at all, and so you get packet loss. And so it doesn't have like there's not a lot of clear answers with the book. Like at each chapter, it doesn't say like here's a 10-line function and this is like this is your congestion controller. It's like a lot of like this is why it's complex. Here's why it's complex. Like hey, like here's some. And the other thing about the book that I've tried to do is I don't try to suggest solutions. So I don't say like go use this browser, go use this software. Like it just stays about the protocols. And my goal is that eventually the book will hopefully be good enough that everyone will feel comfortable recommending it. So, people in the Janus community, people in the GStreamer community, people in the Pion community will read it and contribute. And it can be this community-owned thing that just helps make us all better.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will add that something that I've ran into while explaining how video on the internet works in general to people is the resource trade-off. Like someone has to pay for the pixels. It's either your server or your client. So figuring out which one is which has always been not easy because, as I said, people tend to melt their servers, then come ask and say, why is this not working? And it's video's heavy.
Yeah. And then you'll say like, well, maybe you can lower your keyframe interval. And they'll say, what's a keyframe? Like every answer you get has 2 more questions. It just never ends. But that's why I like it. Like this job makes me feel useful. Like that's my favorite thing about RTC. Like, we're not running out of problems.
Oh yeah, that's a good thing. That can be a bad thing depending on how close the deadline is.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy that I think the best part is just I'm amazed that more people that they say I'm having a hard time hiring WebRTC developers. I'm like, why are people not coming to this field more? Because it's the most fun to be. There's lots of demand for developers. I don't get it. People are missing out going into machine learning and all the other stuff. RTC is the place to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun, and you do get to play with machine learning on occasion. There is some stuff there too. So one thing one other question that comes up. So I help sales at times, so I'm often on calls with customers, and some people have heard the word end-to-end encryption, either though they don't really know what it means and what it implies mostly. So does Pion support any kind of end-to-end encryption? Do you think it's something the industry will actually use? Because I've heard different opinions about it.
Yeah, so with Pion, I do have people today that use end-to-end encryption. And the nice thing is that it wasn't anything I had to add to Pion. Pion is kind of this dumb pipe. You can add some extra logic if you care about simulcast and stuff like that. You have access to all the bytes to do that yourself. And then I've everywhere I've worked has done some kind of end-to-end encryption, and I hear more and more demand for it. I am not a cryptographer, so I implemented Go's DTLS implementation because I went and read the specs and I picked up a book on it. But I am not when they start talking about key ratcheting and all the really there's some really, really smart people in this field. I just kind of say do your thing. You're smarter than me. But I think it's important, and I also I think it's really important because of how bad WebRTC security is today. I think it was there was a bug with parsing of, I think it was RTP headers and stuff like that, and use after free. I think every Chrome release you have 2 or 3 security issues, and I just don't see it ever getting better with C and C++. So anything we can do for security in depth of adding more for users, I think we should do. So end-to-end security, I think it's great because who knows what the next OpenSSL or libsrtp bug or something like that. It's it's crazy how easy it is to exploit these things and how things are sitting for years and years and years, and who might know about these issues, but they're just not disclosing.
Plus, there's a lot of implementation details in WebRTC too, which are important. Just plain application stuff. Many people have URLs that you can just go to and talk to someone, which is cool if you use what's intended. But if you otherwise, you end up with the Zoom bombing, which comes up regularly. I think you cannot do that anymore right now. But it's been there's a lot to learn. That's not just the actual technical stuff. To security is I think for the most part DTLS though is secure unless we get a bug or something.
So from what I've seen, the protocols I totally trust and I'm not a problem, but it's the implementations. I mean, the Pion had a bug where in a very early version of DTLS, if during the handshake an attacker sent a packet quick enough, that we would assume that it was since the crypto state wasn't available yet, we assumed the packet, we didn't check it, and therefore it got through. So we let through unauthenticated data. And I'm in Go, which is a super high level language. I've got decades of TLS and DTLS experience and tests that I was running and just got missed. And there was a German researcher that sent me a CVE and I fixed it. And I think these mistakes are really easy to make. And I have all the training wheels of Go. So C and C++, it's way harder.
That's interesting. Yeah, the security aspect is going to come in more and more as I think we're start to see traffic shaping. We're going to start to see packet inspection at the ISP level. There's a lot that's I think it's going to happen soon enough. So we, as an open source community, it's better to be ready. And that's you're totally right about that. So one thing about the book I would have noticing, it's also on GitHub. So people are allowed to actually make contributions?
Yes. So it's actually licensed CCC0. So you're allowed to copy the book and you don't even have to attribute me. My only concern is I want good information out there. The book's not going to make me any money. There's nothing in it for me. I was just so frustrated with people joining the Pion Slack and saying like, this is how stun works, and like having to explain it, and like, I don't want to be rude, and I want to like be a good community member. And yeah, it's hard when we have so much bad information out there. So it's so it's all on GitHub. It's CCC0. So like, if you want to copy the entire book and throw it on your website and not even mention me, I don't care. Like, I just want the correct information out there.
I was thinking that if I get some time in the next few days, I want to add the MCU description, since FreeSwitch actually has an MCU internally. So
no, please do. Yeah, no, please do.
Also. I was noticing. So let's wrap this up with a quick real life use case. I come from somewhere else. I am a JavaScript front-end developer with some server-side chops. I see this fantastic interview and decide my future is in WebRTC. Where do I start?
So GitHub, the Pion WebRTC repo has a directory of examples, and the goal is that you should be able to run them in under 5 minutes. Like, you just once you have Go installed, you just run Go build, and it spits out a binary, and then you can play with like sending video, with receiving video, with sending data channels, and you kind of see like all the interesting features of WebRTC. I think that's the first place to start, because that gets people excited. And then maybe read like the first chapter of WebRTC for the Curious and kind of get like your toes wet with like, oh, here's all this complexity and all these interesting things I can do. And then go from there. I always encourage people, go build a project under your own name. And because like, it's so much fun owning an open source project, because it gives you a sense of purpose. You're like, I've built this thing. I have users that use it and like it and depend on it. You're going to make a lot of friends out of it, because you get to work with people, and I've traveled for conferences and stuff I never thought I would do. And then it's also great for your career. Like everyone that comes to me that's like a new grad, I say, go build an open source project with something you're passionate about, and it'll change your life. That's what I encourage people. If you're like, I want to do something with WebRTC, I would say like, what is like your thing that isn't tech that you're excited about? Like, are you excited about like gaming? Are you excited about chess? Are you excited about like whatever it is? Go build like your WebRTC application for that, open source it, and it'll probably change your life.
I was about to say that gaming in particular looks like it's a field where WebRTC is, let's say, underrepresented. I don't even know if it's underrepresented, but it's under talked about. I don't know how to put it. So it feels like someone fresh out of college that plays Call of Duty or plays chess online or whatever would have a lot of fun with the kind of thing that you can do with WebRTC and gaming. So
yeah, no, we just had that. So there's Garrett, developer, had built this thing called Project Lightspeed, which was it does FTL out of OBS into WebRTC. And so you can do, if you do OBS, if you do RTMP, you're dealing with a couple seconds of latency. But with his implementation that uses Pion, it's this server, and you can send your OBS to the server, and people can watch it back in sub-second time. And he got like 3,000 GitHub stars in like a week, and like it's all this super exciting thing, and he gets job offers. Like, yeah, it'll change your life. Like, you really should. Like, gaming, anything, like, you should do it.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. Yeah, and if someone builds anything interesting, and send me a resume. I mean, we're always hiring, especially WebRTC side. So you see, there's that too. Yeah.
Please, and like send it to me, because we have this thing called Awesome Pion, where I post people's projects on Twitter, and I put them in this GitHub repo so other people can find them. And yeah, like, I'll send them your way, because that's
amazing. Well, Sean, thank you very much for joining us today. It was a very interesting chat. We went through a few interesting thing doing. So Sean DuBois, founder of Pion and of WebRTC For Curious, thank you for joining us today, and see you next week.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.